After her stunning rise up the rankings, Eala walks into Flushing Meadows as a different player than the one who arrived a year ago. Can she actually win the US Open, or is the pressure of expectation about to catch up with her? Experts are split. Some call her special. Others warn she hasn't proven she can go the distance. Today we break down the real numbers, the real doubts, and the real path standing between Eala and history. Rewind 12 months. A 20-year-old from Quezon City steps onto a court at Flushing Meadows, and almost nobody outside the Philippines knows her name. She is ranked 75th in the world. She has no tour title. She is, by every measure that matters in professional tennis, a long shot with a good backhand and very little else to prove. And yet, something happens that day that nobody saw coming. Eala rallies past Clara Towson and becomes the first player representing the Philippines to win a Grand Slam main draw singles match in the entire Open era. Not the first Filipina, the first Filipino, period, man or woman, in the history of the modern game. For a country of over 100 million people, one that had never produced a Grand Slam main draw winner before, this was not just a tennis result. This was a national moment. A single win on a Tuesday afternoon in Queens that rewired what an entire nation believed was possible for one of its own. But here's the thing about breakthrough moments. They rarely arrive out of nowhere. Long before that win in New York, Eala had already been writing history in smaller rooms, on smaller stages, waiting for the world to notice. Back in 2022, as a teenager, she won the US Open girls singles title, becoming the first Filipino to capture a major junior crown. She'd climbed as high as world number 2 in the junior rankings. She turned professional at just 14 years old. This wasn't a Cinderella story built on luck. This was a player who had been building, quietly, patiently, toward exactly this kind of moment for years. So when she walked into the 2025 US Open with almost no expectations weighing on her shoulders, she also walked in with something far more dangerous than confidence. She walked in with nothing to lose. That's often when the most dangerous players in sport do their best damage, not when they're desperate to prove something, but when they're simply free to play. Eala's game itself tells part of the story too. A left-hander with a two-handed backhand that she can drive flat and deep, or loop with heavy topspin depending on what the moment demands. A return game that punishes second serves. A competitive habit of raising her level exactly when a match tightens, rather than shirking from it. Still, one win, however historic, does not make a contender. It makes a story, a good one. But the tennis world is littered with players who had one unforgettable week and never built on it. The question heading into this year was never whether Eala could produce a moment. It was whether she could turn that moment into a season, whether the 20-year-old who shocked Flushing Meadows could become the 21-year-old who threatens to conquer it. What happened next would answer that question in ways nobody, not even Eala herself, could have fully predicted.
If Chapter 1 was the spark, this is the fire. Over the following 12 months, Eala didn't just build on her breakthrough. She detonated every reasonable expectation attached to her name. By the time she arrived back in New York for the 2026 US Open, she wasn't ranked 75th anymore. She was ranked 18th in the world, a career high, the highest ranking any Filipino player, man or woman, has ever held in WTA Tour history. Let that sit for a moment. Not just her personal best, a national record, decades in the making, broken by a 21-year-old still early in her prime. The turning point many point to came at Wimbledon. On the lawns of the All England Club, a surface that historically has not been kind to her game, Eala produced the run of her career. She fought her way to the 4th round, the deepest any Filipino has ever gone at a Grand Slam. And along the way, she didn't just beat lower-ranked opponents to get there. She beat Iga Świątek, a 5-time major champion, one of the most dominant players of her generation, beaten, on grass, by a player many had still been calling a surprise just months earlier. That win didn't just add a signature victory to her resume, it changed the conversation about her entirely. She was no longer the plucky underdog capable of one good week. She was a legitimate threat capable of beating the very best players alive on a surface that wasn't even supposed to suit her. Then came Washington. In August, Eala captured her first ever WTA Tour title, and the way she did it mattered as much as the title itself. It took 4 wins to reach the final. Then, in the championship match against Jessica Pegula, a top-tier, battle-tested opponent, Eala found herself down a set, down and facing the kind of moment that has broken plenty of promising careers before hers. She didn't break, she rebuilt. Eala fought back to win 4-6, 6-4, 6-0, closing out the final set in a way that didn't just win the match, it sent a message. This wasn't a player who folds under pressure. This was a player who gets more dangerous the deeper a match goes.
by the numbers, the season has been staggering. 54 singles matches played in 2026 alone, a 36-18 record overall, and a strong 22-9 mark specifically on hard courts, the very surface the US Open is played on. This isn't a fluke season built on one good tournament. This is sustained, structural improvement, match after match, month after month. Former US Open finalist Greg Rusedski, speaking on his own podcast, didn't hold back his admiration. "I think she'll sell out crowds like she did in Toronto," he said. "How impressive was her result in Washington, the way she played. She was incredible." So here she is, world number 18, projected to be seeded 17th at the US Open, only the second time in her career she's entered a Grand Slam as a seeded player. A win over a 5-time major champion on her resume, a maiden tour title won by fighting back from a set down, every trend line pointing in one direction, up. But rises this steep rarely happen with turbulence along the way, and just weeks before she'd land back in New York, cracks would start to show, cracks that would leave even her biggest believers asking an uncomfortable question.
Momentum is a strange thing in professional sport. It can carry a player higher than anyone expected, and it can vanish, seemingly overnight without warning. After her triumphant title run in Washington, Eala carried her 7-match winning streak into Toronto for the National Bank Open. She'd won 7 straight matches. She was playing with the kind of freedom and fire that had defined her entire breakout year. And then, in Toronto, that streak came to an end. It wasn't a total collapse, it wasn't a sign that anything was fundamentally broken in her game, but it was a loss, at a moment when many had started to wonder if Eala could simply keep winning forever. Then came Cincinnati, and this time the result stung a little more. Eala fell to Amanda Anisimova in 3 sets. On paper, that's not a disaster. Anisimova made 2 major finals last year. She's a legitimate top-tier opponent, and losing to her in 3 tight sets is nothing to be ashamed of. But context matters. This wasn't just any loss. This was the tournament directly before the US Open, her final tune-up, her last chance to build momentum before the biggest stage of the year. And it didn't end there. In her actual final warm-up event, the Cincinnati Open, Eala exited in the 3rd round. 2 events, 2 early departures, right before the tournament everyone expected to define her season. For a player who had spent the entire year building an aura of inevitability, these results were the first real crack in the narrative. Was the season catching up with her physically? 54 matches is a heavy workload for anyone, let alone a player still adjusting to life in the top 20, still learning how to manage the grind of consecutive elite-level tournaments. Was the pressure of rising expectations starting to weigh on her the way it weighs on every player who transitions from surprise contendant to expected performer? Or was something else happening, something less alarming than it looked on the surface? Some analysts have floated a different read entirely. Rather than viewing the Toronto and Cincinnati exits as warning signs, they've suggested these early losses might actually work in Eala's favor. A Grand Slam is not 1 match. It's not 2. It's a potential 7-match gauntlet across nearly 2 weeks, against increasingly difficult opponents at every single round. A player who exhausts herself in the lead-up tournaments often has nothing left in the tank when it matters most. By exiting early in Toronto and Cincinnati, Eala arrives in New York with fresher legs, more recovery time, and crucially, no accumulated fatigue heading into the most physically demanding 2 weeks of the tennis calendar. It's a compelling theory, but it's still just that, a theory. Nobody knows for certain whether these losses were the sign of a player running out of steam, or a player conserving exactly the right amount of energy at exactly the right time. What we do know is this: the doubts are real now. For the first time all year, Eala isn't just being asked how far she can go. She's being asked whether her season has already peaked, and whether New York is where that peak quietly starts its decline. The tennis world, as it always does before a Grand Slam, has started choosing sides.
Every Grand Slam produces its share of predictions. Most of them are forgotten within a week. But the debate swirling around Eala heading into this US Open feels different, because it isn't really a debate about her talent anymore. Almost nobody questions that. It's a debate about her ceiling, about timing, about whether belief and readiness are actually the same thing. On one side stands Greg Rusedski, the former world number 4 and US Open finalist, who has been one of Eala's most vocal supporters throughout this entire season. Speaking on his own podcast, Off Court with Greg Rusedski, he made his position unmistakably clear. "She's on the cusp," Rusedski said. "She's the first Filipina to make the 4th round of a major. I wouldn't be surprised if she's in the quarters or semis. She's that good." That is not a cautious prediction. That is a former top 5 player putting his credibility behind the idea that Eala isn't just capable of a good tournament, she's capable of a deep, potentially career-defining run at the year's final major. He didn't hedge. He didn't qualify it with the usual caveats analysts use to protect themselves from being wrong. He simply said it. Quarters or semis. That's the bar he set for her. And when you look at the season Eala has put together, it's not an unreasonable bar. A win over Iga Świątek, a maiden title won by battling back from a set down, a career-high ranking, a projected seed for just the second time in her Grand Slam career. Rosetsky's confidence isn't blind faith, it's built on real evidence. But not everyone shares that confidence. The skeptics point to a different set of facts entirely, drawn from the exact same season. They point to the early exits in Toronto and Cincinnati. They point to a workload of 54 matches already logged in 2026, a number that raises legitimate questions about fatigue heading into a tournament that can demand 7 matches across 13 grueling days. They point to the fact that Grand Slams are not won on talent alone. They're won on the ability to sustain peak physical and mental performance match after match, round after round, for 2 consecutive weeks. Some of Eala's doubters also raise a subtler concern, the psychological weight of expectation itself. Last year, she arrived in New York with nothing to lose and everything to gain. This year, she arrives as a projected 17th seed, a player people expect to advance, a player whose earlier exits are suddenly viewed not as normal setbacks but as troubling signs. That shift from underdog to favorite is one of the hardest transitions in professional sport. Plenty of talented players have buckled under exactly that kind of pressure before. So which version is correct? The version where Eala's talent and momentum carry her deep into the second week, or the version where fatigue, pressure, and a difficult stretch of hard-court opponents catch up with her before she gets the chance? The truth is, nobody actually knows. That's what makes this US Open genuinely compelling, rather than a foregone conclusion dressed up as suspense. The numbers support both arguments. The evidence points in 2 directions at once. To understand which side is more likely to be right, we need to go beyond opinions and predictions. We need to look at the cold, hard structure of the tournament itself, her seed, her draw, her surface record, because sometimes the data tells a story the debates can't. Strip away the opinions, the podcasts, the predictions, and what's left is a set of numbers. And numbers, unlike experts, don't have an agenda. Start with the seeding. Eala is projected to enter the 2026 US Open as the 17th seed. This is only the second time in her career she has entered a Grand Slam tournament as a seeded player, the first being Wimbledon earlier this year, where she reached the 4th round. A seed matters enormously in a Grand Slam draw. It protects a player from facing the very best opponents in the tournament opening rounds, when nerves, unfamiliarity, and the sheer scale of the event can undo even talented competitors. For a player who has spent most of her career fighting through qualifying rounds and unseeded draws, entering as a protected seed represents a structural advantage she has never really had at this level before. Then there's the surface. The US Open is played on hard courts, and hard courts are statistically Eala's best terrain. Her 2026 record on the surface sits at 22 wins against 9 losses, a winning percentage that outpaces her overall season record. This isn't a player hoping to adapt to unfamiliar conditions. This is a player walking onto the exact surface where her game has produced its most consistent results all year. Her overall 2026 season record, 36 wins, 18 losses across 54 matches, tells its own story too. That's not the schedule of a player who stumbled into one good tournament. That's the schedule of a player who has been consistently competitive at the core level, week after week, against a mix of ranked opponents across nearly every surface the calendar offers. And then there's history, specifically her own history at this exact tournament. Last year, unseeded and with almost no expectations, she made the second round and delivered one of the most significant wins in Philippine sporting history along the way. This year, she returns not as an unknown quantity, but as a player opponents will have scouted extensively, studied closely, and prepared for specifically. That cuts both ways. It means less surprise value, but it also means she's proven, under the brightest lights this sport offers, that she doesn't shrink. What about her draw itself? At the time of writing, the full women's singles draw hadn't yet been released. It's set to be revealed on August 27th, just before the tournament begins. But even without knowing her specific opponents round by round, the broader picture is clear. As a projected 17th seed with a strong hardcourt record, Eala is positioned to avoid the very top-ranked players until the tournament's second week, giving her a genuine, data-supported runway to build momentum before facing the sport's true elite. There's also the matter of her schedule beyond just singles. Eala isn't only playing singles this US Open. She's teaming up with world number 4 Felix Auger-Aliassime in mixed doubles, joining a star-studded field that includes names like Serena Williams and Carlos Alcaraz. So, can Eala actually win the US Open? If we're being completely honest with you, the answer is probably not the one you came here hoping for. No, she is not the favorite to lift the trophy. She's a projected 17th seed at a tournament that will include some of the most dominant players the sport has ever produced. The most statistically likely outcome is that she competes hard, perhaps produces another signature win along the way, and eventually loses to a player ranked above her. But that's not really the question that matters here. Not this year. The real question is whether Eala can take the next step in a career that has already exceeded almost every reasonable expectation placed on it. A year ago, she was an unseeded 20-year-old who shocked the world with one unforgettable win. Today, she's a career-high world number 18, a Grand Slam quarterfinalist in the making, according to some of the sport's most respected voices, a player who has already beaten a 5-time major champion this season, and a champion in her own right after that gutsy come-from-behind title run in Washington. Whether or not she lifts the trophy in New York, one thing is already true. Eala has redefined what's possible for tennis in the Philippines. She is no longer a promising prospect. She is a genuine top 20 threat that every opponent in that draw will have to take seriously, round by round, point by point. The cracks from Toronto and Cincinnati are real. The questions about fatigue and pressure are legitimate. Nobody should pretend this season has been without turbulence. But the same season that produced those doubts also produced a Wimbledon quarterfinal adjacent run, a maiden tour title, and a ranking no Filipino has ever reached before her. Doubt and belief aren't opposite here. They're just two honest reactions to a player who is still, in many ways, writing her story in real time. Greg Rosetsky believes she's ready for the quarters, maybe even the semis. The data on her hard-court form and her favorable seeding gives that belief real weight. The skeptics believe the fatigue of a 54-match season might finally catch up with her at the worst possible moment. Their concerns aren't unfounded either. Maybe the truest answer is this: greatness in sport rarely announces itself all at once. It arrives in stages. A shocking first win nobody saw coming, a season of quiet, relentless improvement, a signature victory over a champion, a maiden title forged in a comeback, and then, eventually, a tournament where all of it finally comes together at exactly the right time. Is this US Open that moment for Eala? Or is it simply one more step on a longer, more patient climb towards something even bigger down the road? That's the question New York is about to answer. And whichever way it goes, one thing already feels certain. We are watching the rise of a player who is nowhere near finished making history. So, do you think Eala has what it takes to go the distance at this US Open? Or is her rise still just getting started, with the real breakthrough still to come? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the most compelling stories in women's tennis right now, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because this US Open is about to get very interesting, and we'll be here covering every twist along the way.